We start in the UFC. UFC Boston Fight Night this past weekend gave us a light heavyweight main event with title implications as Dominick Reyes scores a first-round knockout of former middleweight champion Chris Weidman. In the end, wasn't much of a fight as Reyes did the damage, sending Weidman to his 5th loss in 6 fights. We'll get to Weidman in a second, but I mentioned off the top here, you're now seeing Dom Reyes in Toyo Tires commercials. This was an opportunity, a launching point to put himself in title contention. Yeah. He certainly, after the fact, made the calls of Jon Jones that you'd expect. Did we learn anything new from this performance, though, Chuck, from the standpoint of saying he's ready, he's next in line at 205?
I think that's what we learned, right, is that he is ready. I wasn't sure going into this. I thought this was a unique matchup, obviously, with Chris Weidman moving up in weight. I wasn't sure what form we'd get him in, but I go back to that Jared Cannonier. When he finished Jared Cannonier, I was like, and that begins to look really nice, too, given how Cannonier has kind of started rolling himself. So now he puts this one together in a big moment. And I thought he shined, man. I thought he shined. And if you need contenders in that division, there's always a dearth of big talent at the top. And I think we finally uncovered the guy to go after Jon Jones.
You know, we didn't learn a whole lot because of the short nature of the fight. It was basically one prolonged takedown attempt from Weidman. They get back to the feet, and then it's a short punch right on the chin. But for Reyes, he certainly had questions that I thought he needed answering. Not that he's not good, but we know this is a shallow division. You know, you put a couple wins together, Johnny Walker doesn't seem to be ready. They're going to give you that push. I'm not sure, though, even as impressive as this win looked, that I know much more than I did coming off of Reyes' last fight against Volkan Ozdemir, where I thought he benefited from getting a decision that maybe he didn't earn.
Yeah,
he got taken down at will. So from the standpoint of your UFC and the matchmakers, you're saying, okay, we got to do the business. Jon Jones, Dominick Reyes next. We have a guy with good size, a good style. What is that Volkan fight to you? Was it an aberration? Because if he's taking guys down like it's a nightclub in Fort Lauderdale, just knocking dudes out easy with Reyes, what's Jon Jones going to do?
Well, you would think that Jon Jones is going to capitalize on that, but the Jon Jones that I've seen recently is susceptible as Reyes. I mean, he's fighting not to lose, not to win these fights. I thought he was going to cruise right past, in his last fight with Santos, and he did not do that. In fact, I had him losing in that fight. So I think that just because that version of Jon Jones was our last look, he looks more right for the picking to me, and a guy like Reyes, just given that he's a natural, 205er, and he's tall. Remember the big Gustafsson, the first Gustafsson fight when they were marketing tall and then length and all that? I feel like he could create a few problems in there. So I'm personally sold on it, but it's like the kind of thing where you skew it because you're not sure who else is around. It's really just that he's the most obvious choice at this point.
Well, look, this was his first real main event A-side opportunity there. I mean, Weidman had the much bigger name, of course, but this was an attempt to showcase him, and he passed that test with flying colors. So you got to give him his due, and I think in some regards, Chuck, you don't really know who a guy is until they actually end up getting in there against Jon Jones. I never would have guessed that Maheta could give him 5 rounds of hell to that level, even from what we saw in the finishes that Thiago Santos had coming in. I didn't know he could go to that next level. It certainly meshed perfectly, like you mentioned, with Jon Jones really not going for the finish, maybe not taking him down at the level he could have, or at least as pundits we thought he should have. We're not really going to know, I guess, Reyes-wise until you see him in there. Had a couple of those performances that really give you those feels that he's got the size, got the volume, striking ability. Is there any sort of X factor you've seen so far where you're like, that's it, that's what's going to give Jones issues?
Probably the hunger factor, just because he's been gunning for Jones. I feel like Jones is more complacent these days. He goes in there and you don't really feel that energy that he had early on in his career. So just being the target for as long as he has, I feel like maybe maybe that's an intangible. It must be difficult for him to get up for those types of fights in the end, and so maybe that works in the favor of Reyes.
I mean, look, Jones was in an interesting spot when he came back from the USADA suspension, in that he fought, 3 times in 7 months. None of those 3, with the exception of the Gustafsson rematch, really had like a sexy hook to it that you have to see. So I get what you're saying in that regard, but if you come at the king, you best not miss. Has Reyes connected so far from the standpoint of trying to get Jones' attention? I mean, he's basically referencing Boogar Sugar and the bad habits that Jon Jones has had outside the cage. Is that going to get enough to wake Johnny up?
At this point, it's just like everybody mentions that. You know what I mean? I don't know. It seems like Jon Jones just shrugs off these things anyway. So I don't know. I feel like it's just one of those things for Jon Jones. If he wants to just kind of keep his legacy rolling, and because we have these natural contenders, this is who you want to fight maybe. I don't know if he's necessarily, I mean, he doesn't strike me as a guy who's chasing like the big money fight. He's not going up to heavyweight trying to create like some marquee fight.
He's reaching down. He's trying to get out of Sonya's.
He's reaching down. So I feel like this is kind of a suitable guy for him. I don't know how much it moves his needle. Like if he goes in and he just goes right through Reyes, I'm not sure what that does for Jon Jones other than keep him rolling along.
I will say this though, my excitement level for Jon Jones, Anthony Smith was pretty low at that point, considering this is Jon Jones, this is a title fight.
True.
Same thing for Thiago Santos at the time.
I think that's the biggest problem, right? Is that each one of these has an equal low bar.
Well, I was going to give Reyes credit here.
Okay.
Even though Thiago Santos exceeded my expectations, you can argue I should have given him more credit coming in. I still think Dom Reyes is going to be an interesting out.
Yeah.
He's willing to talk trash. He's willing to try to get in Jones's head. Hey, I'm in. I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm good. This is
and he's had these flashes where he looks really good. So, like you said, I would have liked to have seen a little more in this fight just to get a better gauge of that. But I mean, he got the job done, and he showcased his power a little bit. So I'm game, you know.
And the B-side lead story to this, maybe even the biggest story coming out of this, though, is the fall of Chris Weidman. I mentioned it. 5 losses in 6 fights for the 35-year-old. All 5 by knockout. Yeah. Now, in his favor, Chuck, UFC, for the most part, you're always going to have to go big. These are 5 elite opponents that he's faced. These were some fights where he had moments and was doing well and suffered somewhat disastrous sort of bad luck knockouts. But it's still 5 of 6. He did barely anything in this somewhat desperate move up in weight, talking a big game, coming out there, really didn't able to get to show much but save for a takedown. On a scale from Johnny Hendricks to Renan Barão, how rough is this fall to go from champion to now we're straight up saying, where do you go next? Do you go anywhere next?
I like that. I like that, trying to figure that out. I would actually put him closer to Renan Barão because I didn't see Renan Barão's thing coming. Like he'd won like a decade streak where he was winning. Dana White was calling him one of the best of all time.
Dana told me he was the pound for pound king, all right? That's what Dana said.
So now we know Dana always tells the truth too. So but you know, the way T.J. Dillashaw kind of just buzzsawed right through him, and I was shocked, and I kind of felt that way. It wasn't exactly like that, but when Rockhold was able to beat Chris Weidman, it had a feeling like that because I felt like I've had Weidman up here. He was a guy that actually, when you talked to him after he beat Anderson Silva, was already talking about Jon Jones. It was like he wanted to challenge the toughest guys. He had that wrestling base. He had the power. He had the, you know, he's a psychology major. You know, so he knew kind of how to play these guys in the lead up. I just thought he had all the elements, man. So to know that he's been on that kind of spiral, it really is similar to Renan Barão after that Dillashaw fight because he just never looked the same. The big difference, I think, for Weidman is you watch through your fingers a little bit, and I was doing that with this fight. You feel like if he gets hit clean, he's going down, and I hate it when you get to that point.
I hate it. It's Chuck Liddell flashbacks.
It is.
And it's unfortunate because in some of those fights, like we said, I mean, the Rockhold fight where he lost his title, he was certainly in that and controlled, you know, most of it. That was a brutal fight that went back and forth at the end. But for a while, he's ahead of that. You go into that Jacare fight, he's winning a great stretch of that. Even Romero.
That's the hard thing.
Didn't he have moments against Romero?
He did. He's looked decent in most of those fights. This one, you know, is the only one where I felt like he didn't really offer much in terms of the competition.
Problem is with 5 of 6 losses, though, we're no longer like, is it time? I know he came out afterwards and he said, look, you know, all praises to God, all this kind of stuff. I'll be back. I don't want him or need him back. So do you have any issue with the matchmaking run he'd been on? That there didn't come a certain point after 2-3 losses in a row where you say, okay, this guy's a brand. He's a former champion. He wants to keep fighting. Let's soften him up a little. You don't always see that in UFC.
No. And if he had lost that Gastelum fight, imagine where. I mean, I can't imagine. Like because that's the one reason to give him just the ounce of hope that he's rediscovered some of that old mojo. But
he'd be rematching Machida and Bellator right now. He had, right?
I'm to the point with you, man. You get a little squeamish when you watch certain fighters, the way they get knocked out. And let's face it, UFC 194, man, that was one of those fights where you know it took something out of them. You know it took something out of them, and it's played out that way. I don't like the fights where you basically are like, ooh, we might be talking bad, you know, about, you know, playing the, you know, the dirge music after this one because it has that feeling. I didn't like the matchmaking, to be honest, on this one. I would rather, if he's making that leap, to go against more of a middle division guy who, you know, maybe he could at least show his offense a little bit.
Maybe before this fight.
Even before,
loss,
because they are monsters, man. Like you mentioned, these are all monsters that he was fighting.
I mean, it's weird because you could say that UFC did Weidman no favors in this 205 debut by giving him a name this big who's on the cusp of a title shot. But yet at the same time, you know what I said on last week's show? Weidman gets a win over Dominick Reyes. He's probably getting a title shot. And that's what happens when you become sort of an aging brand and you become sort of that Rich Franklin stay-by-the-phone fighter who can just fill in multiple weight classes. But it was just 3 years ago that Weidman and Rockhold were on top of this middleweight division. And holy crap, a lot can change in a short amount of time.
And both guys seemed unbeatable at that moment.
I still got that UFC 199 poster in my office for the rematch that never happened. And then Bisping changed the middleweight narrative. But do you point to anything for Weidman? Because now that we're sort of, in my mind, past the point of wondering if he still has it, he's just in that sort of Chuck Liddell mode where anytime someone touches his chin, I think it's over. What happened? How do you explain the wheels falling off Weidman?
I don't know, man. I really don't know. Like it just happens for certain guys. I don't know. It wasn't like he was taking a ton of damage before. The weight cut was the big issue, right? And especially, like, I think it was, who was he fighting? There was a fight where he had to cut like 30 or 40 pounds in a very small window on a short notice type of thing. I remember back then thinking, ooh, this might be bad for his long-term career, you know, that sort of thing. But where the chin thing started happening, I don't know, and I wouldn't have placed him in that category, man. It's just that when
it goes, it
really goes quick.
It's absolutely gone. I hate to see it. I'm not going to pile on Chris Weidman here, but you're going to buy in at all to my theory now that we are piling on that he never beat Anderson Silva. Silva just lost twice. Just kidding. Just kidding. Come on. All right, bring in the comments. I know they're coming. Man. All right. Stipe never beat DC. You know where I'm going with that.